Hello there, Itroo here. Today's video is going to be covering the panorama effect that came in with the skyscrapers from the High Life DLC. So what we're going to be covering in today's video, and there's going to be a bit of explanation here, we're going to be understanding exactly what the panoramic effect is, how the bonus effects actually are calculated, how you can actually min-max it, and how it all synergizes together. So let's actually understand what the actual panoramic effect is. So the basic premise behind the panoramic effect is how desirable it is to live in that particular skyscraper depending on the actual views and vistas around it. And that is defined by how many other skyscrapers in proximity are actually not blocking the views from your skyscraper. So if you have skyscrapers around you that are lower than you, you're going to be getting a benefit from the views from being in that skyscraper. So there is no negative effect from having no panoramic effect. If you have a look here, we have our investor skyscraper, which has no panorama effect. We're not going to be getting any benefits, but we're not actually in a negative either. So what stats are boosted from the actual panoramic effect? If we have a look at a intense one, which is the highest grade, as you can see here, we are getting a bonus to residence and we are getting a bonus to income. Now there are 5 ranks on the actual grading on this, going from weak to intense. Weak will start at a 5% income and 5 bonus residence, all the way up to intense, which is 15% and 25% bonus residence. And this is calculated on the base materials on your actual skyscraper: the champagne, cigars, chocolate, carriages, and electricity. Now, the new items in-game for the actual skyscrapers to actually level up will have a innate bonus to the numbers of investors and coins. The panoramic effect just boosts the base stat even higher from the base materials. So if we go in and actually have a look at the actual names on each of the actual tierings, if you go up to the tutorial panel up here, click on it, it'll bring up a fairly detailed explanation of some of the premises that we're going to be going over. So as you can see, we are in the tutorial menu here, and we can see these are the 5 ranked panoramic strengths, all the way from weak all the way up to intense, and each of them will have an incremental increase on the base from 5% and 5 people all the way up to 15% income and 25 residents. And then we also have here a fairly good explanation of the basic premise behind the actual radius. Now the radius on the actual number of skyscrapers that can affect it does go up depending on how high your skyscraper is. Now this is very important to understand when you're looking at the investors and the engineers skyscrapers, as an engineer skyscraper can only go up to tier 3, which is here, whereas a investors can go all the way up to tier 5. And as you can see, the range of a tier 5 versus a tier 3, you're going to be having 4 extra buildings on this premise here that could be a benefit to the actual stat. Then here we have green, which is lower, is a +1. Brown, which is the same or higher than it, is going to be equating to a 0 panoramic effect, and then 0 are the ones that are going to be outside of range. So what we can actually have a look is how we're actually getting to these ranks from weak to intense. So here we are again, selecting one of the tier 5 intense strength skyscrapers. And the important thing to remember is there was 5 rankings on the actual strength, and we have here some calculations when we actually mouse over the actual strength ranking. So as we can see here, we have a level 5 value, which is graded on the actual tier of the skyscraper, which we have a tier 5. Now remember, the engineers will only be able to go up to tier 3, so you're only going to be able to get a +3 on that stat. And then we have 6 smaller skyscrapers around it, giving us a total of a +11. Now, as you can see, we have taller or equivalent buildings around us, which is a -6, which is bringing us to an overall of +5, which is a number tier 5 ranking system, which is intense. If we have a look at the weak one here, mouse over this. As you can see, we have a +5 on the level because we're tier 5. However, there is only 4 skyscrapers around it, giving a benefit, which is a +9 in total. And then we have 8 around it, which are a negative, which is giving us a +1 on the overall, which is weak. So that is how it is actually calculated on the actual individual ones. So if you remember, going back onto the actual tutorial and then onto the radius, depending on what grade you actually have in your skyscrapers, it will travel further on the actual skyscrapers. Each one will normally get an actual block on its actual radius, and that will calculate from one and sideways as well. So this is going to equate that the engineers skyscrapers are going to be much harder to min-max. You are going to be able to min-max, however, the leniencies on being able to push and get extra ones here and there is going to be much more reduced, as you can only have a benefit of a much reduced number of skyscrapers around it, and you're going to have a tier 3 on the actual level as a cap. Now, one question you're probably asking yourself is, if it is a view-based system, depending on how many equivalent buildings around it are lower than it in height, does the fact that we have our skyscraper here and we have a regular tier housing next to it, obviously you would think it's not blocking the views, so it should have a bonus from the actual panoramic effect here. Unfortunately, regular houses are not actually calculated into the actual tiering system. So if you want to have the ones on the outside edge calculated, they need to be upgraded to a skyscraper ranking system. So you can't have small buildings around it, unfortunately. So how can you actually understand quickly and easily what sort of tiers of skyscrapers you have around without actually clicking on each one individually and seeing what tier it is? There is an easy little thing you can do. So if you actually select one of your tier 4 or 5 or whatever grade you're looking for, if you hold down the shift key, it will actually highlight all of the other skyscrapers on the island that are an equivalent tier. So this is an easy way for you to actually understand where you've actually got your tier 5s, and then you can also then select your tier 4s and then hold shift and see exactly which ones are tier 4 and tier 5. Very useful if you're trying to min-max and balance things out visually and you have a set sort of template that you're going to be working for. And templates is one of the things we're going to be having a look at next. So before we go into the actual templates at min-maxing, is the panoramic effect actually worth actually doing? So here's a prime example. We have a tier 5 with no panoramic effect, which has a max capacity of 245 people, and it is being affected by this town hall, which is boosting out the residents on top of it as much as we can. Versus we have this over here, the exact same people in here. And if we have a look at a tier 5, 370 versus the 245. So that is a big increase on the actual number of population we can actually have in here. And as you can see, income is at 15,000 over there, versus if we have a look at this, we're down to 7,000 here, and it's 6,000 on maintenance. So the amount of income you're actually going to be bringing in is quite huge. And if you have to filter in the fact that you have all these extra production lines, that 7,000 is not going to be covering all the other maintenance costs quite as well. Now, to actually have the tier 4s in here, as you can see, we're only at a tier 4, 205. So we're only losing 40 by having tier 4s down, but we are going from 245 up to 370 on the tier 5s. So it really is actually worth actually spending a little bit of time and actually fixing the panoramic effect on as many buildings as you can, as it is an easy and simple way of boosting your housing and population and income. So we have a look at the templates that I can recommend utilizing. Now these are going to be varied depending on your difficulty settings and play style. So we're going to cover a couple of different things you can utilize and some basics as well. So some people are going to have small little blocks of housings together, and some people are going to have big blocks of housings together. Now there are going to be other templates like the 10x10 and the 3x3s that I'm not going to go into at the moment. However, they will cross over and you can use these to actually influence those layouts as well. But to understand the basic premise of how you can get the most bang for buck in your housing, if you are using clusters, doesn't matter whether you have vertical or horizontal groups or mixed match of housing together. This is a min-max sort of layout here of housings all around, and it's mixed vertically and horizontally. The basic premise is to have a wave or row system of ranking houses. So if we have a look here, we have a tier 5, hold down shift, and we have a row of tier 5, and below it, to give the bonus panoramic effect, we have a tier 4 directly in front of it. Now we have a row separating them, and then we have the exact same setup behind it. Tier 5s with tier 4s. Now as you can see, we've gone into vertical here, and it's not having any different effect. The premise is to have a row of tier 4 with a tier 5, so you're going to be getting the panoramic bonus on both sides of the tier 5s here. And as we saw, the tier 4 on no panoramic effect is not much different than a tier 5 with no panoramic effect. However, you really want to focus the panoramic effect purely onto the tier 5s to get that huge bonus. So go over that again. Waves of tier 4 and tier 5 if you want a clean and simple way of organizing your housing systems. Now to have the best panoramic bonus effect, you're going to want to have 2 tall, and then you're probably going to be having them going out expandingly wider and longer. So if you have a look at some of the basic templates here, you have my trusted 3x2 layout system that I tend to play with on the max difficulty settings. As you can see here, if we have a look at our tier 5s here, we have intense and intense and intense, 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 and intense. And then we have our tier 4s here. And now we can actually, because of the grouping and the road separation, which is taking away some of the native buildings around it, we can actually utilize a tier 5 in one of the lower slots here. And it's not going to be up on high rankings, but it is going to be giving you a slight benefit. So if you're looking for min-maxing, there's some ways of getting extra population. So if we have a look at the tier 5s, hold down shift. As you can see here, I'm using a T system here. Tier 5s, and then a tier 5 in the middle, and then on the corners, tier 4s. So that's going to give you min-max on a 3x2 block system. So we have a look at some of the 4x2 block systems here. This is where we can actually see some variance. So as we can see here, we have our tier 5s all here in a T system, and then tier 4s below it. But this is where, because we have the road separation here, bringing in more houses in proximity to the actual buildings because they're tightly packed together, you are going to have more buildings that can have a positive or negative actual effect on the panoramic effect. So we look here, we have intense on that one, intense on that one, intense on that one, and then we go down to decent, as we have this is a tier 5 here. However, because we have all the other buildings around it decreasing this one, this is weak. That one is at decent, and we've lost 50 there, and we haven't gained 50 here on the max capacity by having this up at a tier 5. So actually having a T system and having those extra buildings in close is actually going to be a negative. So you want to keep it on a wave system for a 4 block system. So if you are using the larger block system here, as you can see, we have a 6x2 block system here, and we have a system where we have intense all the way across the top row of tier 4s here, and again tier 4s all nice and intense here, However, because we have an increased number of buildings that can bonus it or have positives on it in proximity to each other, we can actually have a T system here. And if I was to have them all in the middle in proximity to each other, they would start having a negative effect because they would be becoming in proximity to each other if it was in the middle here. So I tend to recommend having a 6-block system and having the T bottom section on opposing corners and indented slightly, because if we have one here, that isn't going to be going into effect here. So you can actually offset the lower T junction here and actually start incorporating the intense across all of the tiers at the top just by staggering and layering your lower ones when you're going into larger block systems. So as you can see, if you're utilizing a 3x2 block system, you can utilize the T system here. If you are going to be utilizing 4 blocks, you're going to want to utilizing a wave system, tier 5s and pure tier 4s. However, if you're going to be using larger block systems, you can use a full row of tier 5 and you can start bringing back in a tier 5 into the lower. However, I would recommend staging or staggering them from one corner to the opposite and then back across, and keep doing that. So you're just trying to reduce the negative panoramic effect from this building here, from these buildings, and this one here. So as you can see, that isn't having an effect on that one. That isn't having an effect on those ones there. Just by offsetting the actual ones that is tier 5 in the lower ranks will allow you to get min-maxing as much as you can. It's not much of a bonus, but it is. Every little bonus will help. So, does the same layouts work for the engineers? Unfortunately not, because you have to remember the engineers can only go through to a level 3 on the Skyscraper system, which is only going to be a positive +3. Also, because they are level 3, they have a reduced range on the radius of the panoramic effect, which also means the fact that because we're going to have the negative ones here, which are going to be much heavily impactful on the maths, because we can't go higher in the level of the base, means we have a look here. We have a 3x2 block system, and we're utilizing the same T system here. And as you can see here, we are only getting to moderate here because we are +3 on the base value, and we have 3 lower around it. But because we have 4, we are only getting into a +2. Whereas if we had the base level above that to +5, we would be getting into a higher ranking system. And we would also have a larger range on the negatives or the positives from this one over here, which is a tier 2 as well. So these ones will be getting a bonus from that one. However, because they're tier 3, it doesn't expand to have this as a +1 as well. So if we have a look at some of the larger ones, as you can see here, we have our tier 3 here, which is intense, and we're utilizing the same min-max optimized placement here, offset on either corner and just not going to the edge. And if we have a look here, we have intense, 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 and then we go to this one, we are strong. And again, this is because the reduced range on a tier 3 doesn't go vertically and horizontally up into this building here, so we're not getting the benefit from this being a lower tier as well. So you can't utilize this because this is going to be bringing it down. If we put the tier 3s in here, it is going to cluster the negatives here and bring these two here on this side in the middle here down really bad as well. So unfortunately, because they are tier 3, we're going to have to roll back to utilizing a pure row system. There's no other way around it. If you want to get the most panoramic effect here for intense, we have to stick to a simple row system. Start trying to put one in the middle here, because they have such a reduced range, really does just mess up and you can't actually get it to balance correctly. Now, if you're not in for all the min-maxing, but you still want to have a decent amount, and you're not looking to have just pure roads and you want a more natural looking skyline system, this is what I have been utilizing in some of the larger block systems. We're going to be utilizing, if we have a look here, shift, we're going to be utilizing 6 tier 5s and all the ones below it here as well. And we're not going into tier 4s everywhere, we're actually going into tier 3s and some of them as well. Now, we're not going to have all of the tier 5s in 10s, but having a L shape offset on either side like this does actually enable us to have, if we have a look here, intense, 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 decent, decent, and then these two aren't intense. So we are getting some intense here. So I like this as a natural looking layout here. It makes it less linear and blocky and has a lot more variance on its actual tiering systems. Hopefully you found this video enlightening and helpful. If you did, I do appreciate any likes on the video and subscription to the channel. There will be a lot more videos coming out in regards to the High Life DLC, so stay tuned, and I'll catch you on the next one.